E1 in Star Rail is generally less talked about, unlike the broken E2, but they can also be game-changing Eidolons that cost less than E2, making them a much friendlier options for players to invest in them. While generally not as powerful as E2, some of them can provide significant boosts and improvements in gameplay that can help you clear in-game faster and more smoothly. Similar to my E2 video, I'll go over some of the best E1 in the game, and explain why they can be powerful tools in your Honkai Star Rail arsenal and why you might want to consider pulling for them. I won't go over every E1, as most of these are just my opinions, and the definition of a good E1 isn't as clearly defined in the community as broken E2. So my goal in this video is to inform you which E1 are worth investing in, as they are only 1 extra cost as opposed to E2, which is 2 extra costs. Some characters may have a good E1 that is independent of a good E2 though. Obviously, some E1 are good as well, but I wouldn't necessarily consider them broken, so I would not cover those as well. I want to start with DPS, and obviously the first character would be Evanescia. So Ye is basically an ult spammer, similar to Argenti, but unlike Argenti, she does real damage. Very unfortunate for Argenti. Maybe he'll get buffed one day. So Ye's E-Wing gives her res pen and 10 more certified banger points. Her ult gets charged by her certified banger, so all of this adds up to more ults down the line and more damage. It is arguably the best E1 in the current game state. In fact, if you're concerned with cost maxing, Ye is more efficient than Silver Wolf, because her E1 gives her a higher floor. She also isn't as reliant on speed, so she's a bit easier to build, I think. There's not much else to discuss about her because her E1 is very straightforward on why it's good, and so I would definitely recommend picking it up on her rerun. Of course, the Forgotten Aglaia also has a really good E1. Aglaia's most glaring issue at E0 is her energy issue, and her E1 massively benefits her on this. Not only does she do more damage, she can also consistently get her ult back. Beyond just being good for her, this also changes her team comp. So Sunday was obviously designed with Aglaia in mind, but with E1 she is no longer reliant on Sunday energy buffs, as most easier Aglaia might still use Sunday to alleviate the energy needs. Since Sirene's buffs are more potent, it would just be better to ditch Sunday and use Sirene instead if you have the E1. The change from Sunday to Sirene is quite drastic, and it just allows her to reach a higher ceiling than ever. I would definitely recommend this E1 as well on her rerun if you want to continue to keep her relevant. Likewise, E1 Heislands allows the entire team to do more dot damage and inflicts one more instance of the elemental dot states. Since both Black Swan and Kafka are usually on her team, this effect is effectively used 3 times, providing the entire team with massive damage amp. This E1 dot is currently one of the best teams in the current meta, so this is a worthy investment as well. The Forgotten Rappa also has a very good E1. Not only is she able to Death Shred, she also regens energy, as she, just like Aglaia, suffers from energy issues. The Death Shred adds up with other sources from Dahlia and Fugue, and scales exponentially to further amp her damage. If used together with her Light Cone, she can basically maintain constant ult uptime and have less downtime overall. In practice, this just means you will only be out of ult for the very first turn, and always be in ult state, and with her S1, you can constantly action advance, which will result in more turns overall. E1 Archer isn't talked about enough, in my opinion. Since he is coming up in the selector, I figured it's worth talking about. Being able to recover skill points allows him to take more actions, and as a hunt character, this just means he can nuke more often. Obviously, this is very powerful with E1 Sparkle, who can run a pseudo 200 speed setup. We also know Rin is coming up and will synergize really well with him. Rin is SP hungry just like Archer, which further amplifies the value of this E1. More SP recovery just means more nukes in general. And we also know E2 Sparkle gives Death Shred, Rin gives Death Shred as well. So this can compound on each other with more Death Shred and more damage overall. Given the disastrous beta of Gilgamesh, if you care about meta, I would highly recommend selecting E1 Archer for free over Gilgamesh. I actually think Jade's E1 is worth mentioning as well. Besides just doing more damage, she also charges her follow-up stack faster. This is especially useful in Pure Fiction, whether you're using her as a battery for either Warnax Blade or Herda. This allows you to effectively pump out more damage and more charges for both Blade and Herda, while doing actual meaningful damage. Of course, it is also a substantial damage boost if you're playing her as a hyper carry. If used well, she is technically an upgrade to Mini Herda, but unfortunately, I do not think 2 costs is worth using over Mini for Herta for free, unless you're playing her as a hyper carry, or you really like her. Ashveo has a pretty underrated UN. Unlike most other UN, his increased damage is always active, so long as he's on the team. Dealing more damage when the enemy's HP are lower also helps clean up mobs easier. It's definitely a good Eidolon to consider getting, regardless if you're using him as a sub DPS or as main DPS. For supports, of course, there's the illustrious Yao Guan.
来杯好茶摇一摇，摇一摇，摇一摇，吉星高照摇一摇，摇一摇，摇一摇，茶香绕，推个牌接财到，来财来财来，上签在手举杯共饮接吉兆，可爱耶。
She generates March Punchline on her ult on top of her basic Death Shred. Besides just providing team-wide Death Shred, she also charges Silver Wolf's hidden MMR much faster, resulting in a faster amp and more damage. More Punchline also means more certified banger for Ye, which translates to more ults. Together with E1 Ye, it is a pretty deadly combo, and your Ye will transform into an ult spamming beast. Of course, she is also amazing for Silver Wolf, especially if Silver Wolf is E2, since you'll be able to proc her E2 more often with stronger AHA instance. This is definitely one of the best E1 you can get in the current meta, alongside the Elation DPS. E1 Serija is a worthy investment if you own Zeely, Anaxa, or Phynon. She gives 36% Death Shred to the active DPS when Peerage is activated, and also regens a bit of energy, though that part is mostly irrelevant. Death Shred scales exponentially, and both Phynon and Anaxa Lycone offer Death Shred. Anaxa E1 also has Death Shred. Zeely usually uses the Genius set, which offers Death Shred. Her E1 has Death Shred as well, so all these sources of Death Shred can exponentially scale together to do even more damage, and this is not considering other potential sources of Death Shred from teammates or endgame buffs. Her E1 is definitely one of the best vertical investments to be made on these teams, however her E2 is pretty bad, as I covered in my last video, so stopping at E1 is usually good enough. Of course, if we're talking about E1, then Tribi is one of the most powerful E1 characters to this day. Despite Mortonak's Blade's insane amp, that didn't necessarily completely undermine Tribi's value, since she now works amazing alongside Mortonak's Blade himself. Of course, this did remove her from some other teams, but she is still a very powerful character in her own right. Her E1 gives true damage buffs as good in all target scenarios, but sees the most use in Pure Fiction, where there are 5 targets. Since true damage is universal, this allows her to technically work in any team comp, including break and dot teams, which otherwise wouldn't have worked well with E0 Tribi. And she can also abuse the DDD Lycone. While in some ways her amp is worse than Mortonak's Blade, she is still a very powerful buffer, and you can't have 2 blades on 2 different teams after all. Regardless, Tribi E1 is definitely still very good. Sadly, her banner just passed, so we'll just have to see if her E1 still holds up then. My last video about E2, I also talked about supports with broken E2. Well, Mortonak's Blade, Sparkle, and Dahlia, in my humble opinion, all have good E1 independent of their E2 as well. Won't go over them deeply since I pretty much covered them last time. So Mortonak's Blade E1 increases his Infinite Fury state and gives Res Pin, which results in more damage and more ults down the line. Sparkle E1 gives speed buffs that allows her to run a pseudo 200 speed setups, which gives her even more turns per cycle. Dahlia provides her dance partner buffs to everyone and elevates her buffs even more to the designated dance partner, which just increases team damage overall and allows the main DPS to deal even more break damage. There are some good E1 sustains too, such as Hyacinth, Briksha, and Lingsha, not Briksha. Why did I say that? Personally, I don't think it's that worth investing in them unless you need that extra edge for some anomaly stages, such as the current Knight 3 and King. Hyacinth E1 increases max HP and heals more. Besides just doing more damage herself, this is very powerful in HP scaling teams, especially with casters, and is, in my opinion, worth picking up for her if you choose to vertically invest in caster's team, since it charges her dragon much faster. Ho-Ho E1 has more buff uptime, increases her healing, and increases all allies' speed, which is good in elation teams due to Silver Wolf's speed scaling. She's also a solid option for Dot, Aglaya, and Saber teams, especially now that you can claim her for free in the shop. It's quite easy to just select her. You will usually not use Lingsha and Break teams because it is a DPS loss, but in the current anomaly, her E1 provides a useful Death Shred that could help your Break DPS potentially clear play or just the normal king in general. That shred is very strong, so I wouldn't just discount it. She also has higher weakness break efficiency, which is pretty good if you're playing her as a DPS. I, however, do not think she's worth investing in, but if you happen to have extra pulls, she is a viable option if she happens to rerun sometime down the line. The reason why these E1 are good, in my opinion, is different from why I think Broken E2 are good. Let me know what you think though. The E1 of DPS usually solves a major issue that is present in it easier, such as more uptime and energy, since Aglaya and Rappa, they all suffer from energy issues. The E1 of the supports typically synergizes well with the DPS they're supporting and compounds onto that, as opposed to E2, which usually manipulates AV and gives extra turns. E1 are still powerful in their own right, and obviously cost less, and an E1 support can synergize well with an E2 DPS, such as Sereger and Vinon, Yaoguan and Silverwall. I think the takeaway from this is that E1 costs less and is easier for your average player to pick them up and invest them in while preserving pulls for other characters. E1 supports are also just good value all around without sacrificing too much, since you can use them in multiple team comps. On my own account, I got E1 Triby, so I can use her in more teams. Actually, the main reason I got her was so I can zero cycle the king. Obviously, I didn't mention every character, and that is either I didn't think they were that broken, or they're too out of meta. Feel free just to disagree, of course. I hope this video helped shed some insight on what good E1s are in the game and are worth your time, as team building is a huge part in Star Rail gameplay. As always, if you found the video entertaining, be sure to like and subscribe for more Star Rail related content in the future.